Had to wait for an hour here. Behind us there are some cables going over the Danube, just being repaired. Here we are mixing some Posca, so that's refreshing, and we're trying to get it some local ingredients. So I have the balsamic vinegar, some local honey, some salt. That's usually all I need for my own Posca here. It's a bit hard if you don't have anything to stir, because the honey, especially when it's cold like that, just doesn't mix that well. So I'm expecting it to clog up a little bit at the bottom and not yet dilute so well. Just need to shake it some time. Let's see. Yeah, got the vinegar right. Yeah. The honey is not yet quite diluted, but we'll get that after a bit more shaking.
Ja, du Tunnelsteuer, ich sag's dir.
Ich hab nichts gesagt.
Du hast nichts. Ich kann's fragen, wie immer.
Ich hab mir nur was gedacht.
Ja, du hast es wirklich gesagt.
Nein, ich hab was anderes gesagt, als ich mir gedacht hab.
das kann ich mir vorstellen. Ja.
This is what the pilot site of living Danube Limes in Romania should have been. This fort here. So much already reconstructed. Who, in the name of God, prevented that this site here becomes the pilot site of living Danube Limes? Look at this.
Here, and you can see later period. Unfortunately, still today we don't have any evidence regarding. We just let's say propose. We don't have any evidence regarding classes Flavia Mesica here.
This amazing fortress at Capidava in Romania is a hot mishmash of 1st century, 4th century, up to the 6th century main part, and it has been partially reconstructed. As we can see, it's quite spectacular, though the reconstruction process was a bit of a hot mess. They just wanted to have everything reconstructed as it was there and didn't care really about the layers. So you have some parts that were actually torn down in the 6th century and that are from the 4th century, like the horseshoe towers that might be from Diocletian's time, that have been stacked up and built up, and behind them the wall that is actually a 6th century thing has been built up. So the archaeologists here are obviously not that happy with those choices, because for reconstruction you should really just choose one area, one era, one layer, and not just mash everything together, because at the end you get something that is neither thing. So not the one or the other reconstruction period. So yeah, unfortunately it's been a bit botched up here. It's very spectacular nevertheless, and you get a feeling for how important and massive this fortress actually was. It's like a settlement inside. There's a Principia over there, and these massive horseshoe and Fächertürme, as we say in German. So the Danube is down here, and this citadel would have been built in several terraces, so like from down there to up here, and yeah, at several points you still see the layers from Constantine's and Diocletian's time. Streets a bit lower than the current layer, and of course there was some medieval after settlements, some dwelling pits that were created in here. Nevertheless, an absolutely spectacular site with many interesting insights, because this area here is very tumultuous. It's a lot of coming and going and invasions, and we can find all the traces here. So I totally am on board with the archaeologists here that say we should, before we reconstruct it any further, think carefully about what we destroy by doing that and what we actually choose to reconstruct. So there's areas here in this fortress that can be sensibly reconstructed. So there's nothing that speaks against reconstructing a gatehouse where the excavations are finished and we actually know how it should be looking like or what height it would have. There's nothing speaking against reconstructing, if we choose the 6th century as a most complete layer, a part of the wall which has actually been partially deconstructed, demounted in the 6th century, and some sort of a trench erected in its place for whatever reason. So that could be very interesting too. Or to reconstruct an entire tower, on one of the big towers, totally usable on the side, and not just like stack some stones on top of each other and then you don't have anything except for a raised level. So there's a lot of thought, conceptualization, a lot of intellectual work that needs to go into these reconstructions. It's always a fine act of balance between economics, interesting things for the audience, for the public, so it plays into the economics, and of course what the archaeologists here are doing, the science behind it, the method and the heritage. So totally on board here. We can't just come in anywhere and start stacking stones up just to make it a tourism attraction. However, in the precise case here, we would have options. I truly believe that we, after long debates and a long talk yesterday with the archaeologists here, I do believe that a few spots of this fortress could be totally reconstructed and be not a nuisance to either the still ongoing excavations, extensive excavations, or the tourism and the development of the touristic value of this entire sector. We are here about 60 kilometers from Tomis, from Constanza, so the motorway is not so far away. This would have been a perfect site for a pilot site. It's currently not the pilot site of Living Danube Limes, as far as I'm informed. And if project partners would have heeded my guidelines for how to choose a pilot site, sustainable one, they would have certainly considered this one much more duly than what they apparently did. Also, the infrastructure to keep the boat here is much better. There is a museum and a museum complex up there, which is fully manned, staffed. It's a lot more money that goes into this place here than at Rasova, where they actually currently do not know how to finance the insurance for the boat. It's over 7,000 euro apparently for the year. They do not know how to finance that. So if there's not an outside financing that's coming, the boat will just not be there probably. And here at this place, I think the interest, the political interest, is really high. It's really awoken. So the boat would have had a much bigger chance to stay here and come to a more developed site and infrastructure here, because the boat would be here in about 8 years only. So there's a lot of time to do something about it. Look at that. It's just glorious scenery as we depart for the last leg of this journey. This journey that, despite everything, is still to be considered quite epic. It is the longest journey a Roman boat has undertaken since the time of the Roman Empire. It's the biggest nautical adventure of a reconstructed Roman boat. thus far, and I intend to outdo it in the future, either with another boat or with another adventure. However, glad to be here at the end of this journey, as I was here at the start of it. Pretty amazing is this mount here that comes down from the citadel. A lot of excavated material. Find loads of things here. Shards, bones, everything. Lots of pottery and other things. I found a sort of a bone handle or something here yesterday. Of course I left it here. Just don't take those things from excavation sites, even though they're just lying around here. And here we go.
Einfach ein Last Swim. Möchte jemand den letzten Schwung machen? Ja, mach mal, oder? Achso, okay. Okay.
Scheiße, ich hab nicht. Dau inclinație foarte mare.
Ăla la porția de frontieră.
Aia la frontieră și mai e una mai jos. Are inclinație mare și dacă mi-ai pus asta de 6 tone pe tare,
se duce în pământ,
se întâmplă ceva rău.
Ai dreptate.
Oh, wait, what a rainy day.
Just readying for departure on the last day to Harshova. We have some 39 kilometers ahead of us from what I just heard.
Want alle aan boord zijn. Doen we deze in en roer.
Pileus is
Dan kunnen
actually
we nog
falling apart already.
vrij mogen lossen.
Need a new Pileus. Yeah. It'll be interesting how all of this ends here. Couldn't have possibly imagined it to end like this. Over 2 years ago. Actually 3 years ago. 3 years ago when we started. Had I known how this moment will be.
You need to see how much you can do.
Not sure if I might have stopped the whole thing in its track. I might have stopped it in the track, but on the other side I'm happy that at least this part has happened. Hello, I'm sitting here one last time aboard the Danuvina Alacris, and this journey has come to an end. And of course you can imagine I have a lot of mixed feelings, certainly some pride mixed with some concern and disappointment. I want to tell you one little story. Where does the name Living Danube Limes project have its name from? It was actually my mother that chose it. When I have been contacted at the start of 2019 because my project idea was deemed quite interesting and worthy by the Danube University in Krems, we started working, of course, brainstorming. I presented all my ideas, I presented my concerns that I have, because I told them from the start that a project with such a heavy living history focus is a very heavy challenge and not to be underestimated, and that they should certainly listen very careful to what the living history experts are saying in order to avoid many of the problems that this project has now faced indeed during its running time. However, we were quickly thinking about how to name this project. There was no name, and people were thinking, how can we name it? We need to create an acronym as well for it that is sounding well or is short enough. And so one day I was sitting at home and telling my mother about our struggle to find a name for the project. And she just said, well, just call it what it should be, Living Danube Limes. The Limes, Danube Limes, is very difficult to see these days. The UNESCO always complains that, well, it should become a very large World Heritage Site, but it's not very visible. And so my idea was to make it visible through living history. Of course, the name Living Danube Limes was thus very, very well chosen, I think, by my mother. Now this project is at its end here, at least the living history, so-called living history part, the journey of the Danuvina Alacris. Of course, the project is not at its end. There's still a conference and some paperwork to be done. However, this end here is very, very much telling for this entire project. There's a nice group of people. We're happy. We're in a good restaurant here. We're accommodated. The local partners have done everything to make it nice and good for us, but it's absolutely not worthy of the effort that this was and of the significance. It's quite telling of the mediocrity that that permeated this entire project. It makes me quite sad, because I have pictured these things. I've warned of the worst case scenario, and what this project has become is worse than the worst case scenario that I've pictured in 2019 when we drafted it up. I have had fears that it would become pretty much what it now was, and that is not a testimony to living history. It is a testimony to the failure of understanding living history, a testimony to a failure of taking living history serious, of recognizing the priorities that need to be there. And yeah, as I said, mediocrity permeated this entire project all the way through to this unglorious end. The glory, however, comes from the fact that this ship reconstruction has now achieved the longest voyage that a Roman ship has done since the times of the Roman Empire. But I'm very sad. I'm saddened when I think about all the people that should have been on board, all the people that looked forward to this journey, all the dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of people that wanted to be part of this journey but couldn't, and that have declined to take part because it was not organized like it should have been organized. And I lament that I could not share these wonderful moments the last weeks with those that this idea was made for, with those that this ship should have been constructed for. I'm very sorry, guys, that I couldn't manage to deliver the dream that I hoped this would become. We have been bested by people that usually best us reenactors. Uninspired, unorganized for the means that you need for historic adventures, and ultimately uninterested in living history. I think this should not happen again in such a form. These are going to be very hard words, of course, in the ears of some, but I think this project should live on in the memory as another project that was stolen from the hands of those that were competent and that lived for it. Another project that was stolen from the hands of living history experts and thus ultimately didn't deliver what it should have delivered. And I think by living on like this project might have a value that we cannot estimate right now, and that maybe some things will change in the heads of those that underestimate the power of living history, that underestimate the expertise of living history, and that constantly try to get the chocolate side of what we can deliver without actually acknowledging what it takes to be able to deliver what we can deliver. So I leave you with those last words, as harsh as they may be. But the reality is, I'm not willing to let something like this happen again. And I think we should all be wary of just being bossed around like this. Not just because of our egos, but because of the value that we bring to the history and science of history and history mediation. I think in times where politicians again use history to create their own narratives, as wrong as they may be, we are one of the finest weapons and tools in the arsenal of historic sciences to counteract political narratives that are incorrect and detrimental for our civilization ultimately. With this I leave you, and we shall certainly have more debates about the outcome of this project. Its good sides, the merit that it undoubtedly has, but also its shortcomings and how to avoid this in the future.